The current youth is affected by a new illness. Experts call it internet addiction. To redirect addicted young people onto the right path, to create independent individuals with respect and responsibility, an institution was established, the Elite Reeducation Academy. This place has the mission of helping the youth grow. The young ones were strictly guided and made to recite prayers created by the organization. One day, 3 of them visited a video game arcade where they found a very peculiar young boy playing a shooter game. When he moved to the next level and realized he had lost, he entered a kind of trance and heard a voice in his dreams. His name is Hibiki, one of the protagonists. He woke up from the strange dream in a completely closed room, surrounded by several boys. He thought he had traveled to the world of the game. He greeted one of the boys enthusiastically, wondering what enemies they would have to face: zombies, monsters, or any other type of creature. The boy pushed him and behaved strangely. He didn't know what was happening, so it was best to remain silent. A group of guards headed to the boy's room, or rather the cell in which they were kept. They had been brought to that place by the staff of the Elite Reeducation Academy. Director Jean introduced herself to them. Hibiki was processing what was happening. Kindness was not one of the qualities of this place. The students were mistreated and strictly disciplined. The young people were treated like trash, and it seemed that someone enjoyed hearing their cries. They were eager to meet the newcomers. The boy who had pushed Hibiki tried to threaten the guards, boasting about his guild of over 100,000 people. He was deceived, and some boys tried to help him, but one of the guards hit him directly in the face, treating him mercilessly. The director ordered the guard not to harm his face since his parents would come next month. After the beating of the young boy, the school's chief instructor appeared. His name was Shin, and he ordered the remaining 3 students to line up. There was only one rule in the academy: obey the director and the superiors. The director left, and Shin took attendance. Dae and Hu responded, while Sei remained unconscious after being apprehended. Lastly, Hibiki, the 17-year-old addicted to the internet. His mother had abandoned him, and he had been brought to this place under her orders. He would be in the academy until he turned 18, with visits and exits prohibited. For being disobedient, he had been drugged and forcibly taken. Meanwhile, the mysterious figure enjoyed reading his file. He would be in quarantine for a year. Shin struck him for looking at the director. They prepared them, and they were dressed in uniforms. It seemed like a prison, with strict schedules. After receiving all of the instructions, the protagonist climbed one of the buildings, thinking about escaping from that place, but he realized it was impossible. He would have plenty of time to contemplate how cruelly he treated his mother. In a different scene, a group of students flirted with some girls, who rejected them without hesitation. The leader of this small group seemed to have been at the school for a while, and the instructors left the newcomers to his guidance. At that moment, they realized that Hibiki was not with them, and the instructors began searching for him. Hibiki contemplated taking his own life, but the mysterious boy who had read his file saved him. However, he didn't care about his death at all. It was a total waste. He wanted his life, and in exchange, he would give it meaning and turn him into a real man. Hibiki didn't believe the boy's words at first, but he didn't actually want to die. He thought his savior was a girl and that he had some strange fetish with him, but the boy got angry and hit him. Meanwhile, the guards continued to search for him, otherwise, the leader would punish them. The boy gave the protagonist binoculars and told him to look out into the field and choose a girl. He would make his wish come true. The girls were the best thing the academy had to offer, and he believed that Hibiki had never held hands with one since he was addicted to the internet. Hibiki saw Shiori in the field and wondered what she was doing there. He told the young man that he had gone to school with her in junior high. She was very beautiful and had been on the honor roll. The boy assured him that he would soon fulfill his wish, and he would be with his personal goddess. Hibiki couldn't believe it. Before leaving, the boy reminded him that his life now belonged to him, and his name was Shin. Shin was furious that they still hadn't located the boy. At that moment, Shin appeared with the protagonist and told the leader that he had gotten lost while looking for the bathroom. Shin warned him that if he tried to escape and Shin covered for him, he would be treated as an accomplice. Shin said that the rookie belonged to him, and the leader accepted it. He would have to take care of him and get used to the school's rules quickly, hoping he wouldn't regret his decisions. The other instructors complain about the way Shin spoke to the leader. He went to a meeting with the director, and a person in the office laughed at him because a student had caused him trouble. The instructors thought both of them had the intention to escape, so they would be keeping an eye on them. On the other hand, the protagonist realized that Shin was not lying and had hope with Shiori. They gather in the field where the other students were. Shin secretly gives orders to Wudo. The overweight guy takes one of the girls by surprise, as she had her phone hidden in her clothes. Wudo forcibly takes it from her. Smuggling was not allowed in the school, so he had to search under her clothes. His authority as a disciplinary officer allowed him to do so. He starts stripping the girl, humiliating her in public. Shiori intervenes and threatens the overweight guy with a knife at his throat. Wudo is scared, and the student council president takes him by surprise. However, she had evidence, and everyone saw it, but he wasn't an instructor, so it wasn't his place to punish her. Wudo's subordinates attack Shiori. Hibiki receives a blow to the face for her, but she didn't need protection. She easily defeats two of them. The overweight guy would settle the score with her later. Either way, he had already obtained the phone. The instructors order the students to return to their classrooms. Shiori helps the girl and the protagonist. The head instructor arrives late to the meeting, and someone important must have caused his delay. Hyo speaks to Shin in a challenging manner. The meeting had ended, and instructor Ryo would give the details. Before leaving, he warns him that the situation with the boy must be under control, or he knows what would happen if things go wrong. Later, Shiori tends to Hibiki's wounds, and an uncomfortable situation arises for both of them. The protagonist feels embarrassed. Shiori makes a deal with the girl she helped. She didn't do it out of heroism. She just wanted her cell phone back to talk to her boyfriend. Shiori also needed to get a phone. If she helped, she could teach her how to defend herself with the knife, and she could also use it to end her life to avoid getting hurt. The girl refuses, and Shiori refuses to help her again. Hibiki couldn't understand how insensitive she had become. She used to be a kind girl, not the person who had inspired him earlier. Shiori is cruel to the protagonist, threatening to cut his tongue if she continued with her sermons. Shin intervenes in the conversation. He has the girl's cell phone that Shiori wanted. He seizes the moment to demand his conditions. One of them had to go after Hibiki's innocence and turn him into a man, and in return, they would get the cell phone. Shiori had her suspicions. The other girl quickly approaches the protagonist and tries to persuade him. Hibiki didn't want to take advantage of her. He would return her phone and act like a gentleman. But those weren't Shin's plans. He had investigated her. Her name was Jun, 16 years old, very good at adapting to situations. 2 years ago, she became obsessed with a group, stole from her parents, and got into trouble. Later, she got the profile of one of the members, they met, and she fell in love. She stole her parents' money to give it to the boy, but he turned out to be a scammer. She knew it and decided to become his accomplice. Other girls reported him, and he went to jail. Jun's parents sent her to the school due to their connections, otherwise, she would be in prison. Shin had no idea how she had gotten the phone, but he suspected she was involved with an instructor. She pretended to be a good girl but was quite the opposite. He also ordered the overweight guy to take care of the phone. Jun loses control and tries to attack Shin, but Shiori stops her with her knife. She was of no use anymore and could leave. Jun flees from the room, vowing to get revenge. Shiori believed she had access to the internet since she knew too much about the others. She could forcibly take her phone, but Shin was very clever. It was just a bait, it wasn't a real phone. If she really wanted one, she should consider his proposal. Hibiki tries to refuse, but each one knew their intentions. Shiori agrees, believing that Shin wouldn't dare to deceive her after seeing how ruthless she was with the knife. However, she wanted proof of the act. The protagonist hesitated but told Shiori that he would help her get a phone with internet. There was no need to obey Shin. She prepares the room without saying a word, tries to lie down with him but fails. Hibiki wasn't cruel. He didn't want to hurt her, let alone force her. Meanwhile, Shin waits outside. He had investigated her and knew she was not an ordinary woman. Shiori remembers the protagonist from junior high, and finding him in that place wasn't good. He had become an addict, but it was more challenging than she thought. She had to do whatever it took to get the phone. She felt disgusted in this situation. The protagonist didn't know why he was in the school, but he would help her escape and get the phone. Hibiki was very sentimental, but she was the opposite, or that's what she wanted to appear. Plus, she didn't trust anyone. She isolated herself to get the evidence Shin wanted. Something would come to her to deceive him. Meanwhile, she had to go get her phone. She had become an unpleasant person, but she was very kind. If someone tried to harm her, she would defend herself. She thanked him and left. Shin gives the cell phone to Shiori. On the other hand, the overweight guy was furious. He had been completely fooled, knowing that Shiori had the phone. Things wouldn't stay like this. The protagonist shows the evidence to Shin, not wanting him to use women in that way again. He grabs him by the throat and begins to strangle him. He had to be careful about how he talked to him and remember his place. He also had to address him as master. Hibiki refuses. The only thing he had agreed to was not to commit suicide. He wouldn't be his dog. He leaves the room, wanting to help Shiori. Shin had a plan, and everything was going as he had anticipated. The protagonist was being harassed for being new. He decides to go to his room to devise a plan. He had no idea where he was or how he would escape. Before entering, he encounters Ben, also known as Boss. He was the superintendent and used to be in the office. If something happened, he could alert him. They enter dormitory number 420. His roommates, Kyo, Rei, and To, welcome him in a friendly manner. From now on, they would be his brothers. The boss takes a photo with them and leaves to attend to his matters. It took the guys some time to prepare their welcome. They order the protagonist to go get lunch while they organize their things. Upon arrival, he realizes there are 2 dining halls, one paid and one free. Most students eat the same thing, and tickets for the other meal were probably more expensive. Shin was enjoying a paid lunch. If he accepted him as his master, he could eat with him, but Hibiki refuses. He arrives back at the room with the lunches, and the guys were expecting a feast. Ben had told them that he was Shin's subordinate, but the protagonist tells them that he rejected him. They close the door and try to teach him a lesson. They had treated him well because they believed he was with Shin, but the 3 of them were losers, just like Hibiki. The protagonist asks them to stop. The guys were very malnourished, and they had even put on makeup to welcome him, as ordered by the boss. They were tired of eating those free pastries. If they continued like this, they would starve. The little money they had was given to the boss for protection, and it wasn't enough to buy food. They were hungry, and Hibiki would talk to the boss. He had to stop exploiting them. They try to stop him, but things wouldn't end well. Hibiki goes to the boss's office and realizes that he had internet access. He was even playing on the computer. On the other hand, Shiori realizes that the cell phone had no signal. Jun tells her it wouldn't work. If she returned it, she could get her a new one, but Shiori didn't trust her. She warns her that classes would start soon. Ben was waiting for the protagonist to bring lunch, or else he had nothing to do in his office. All his kindness had been an act. He had to return to the courtyard and leave his affairs as they were. Otherwise, he would make his life impossible in the school. Everyone in the school acted like lunatics. Classes were about to start. The protagonist arrives in the courtyard just in time. Kyo warns him not to bother Ben. On the other hand, he felt lucky because the first class was physical education. But he didn't know he was in for a tough training, from morning to night, similar to a military school. Chief Instructor Shin repeats the rules again, as there were newcomers. They had to be ready at 7 a.m. for training, and there was a curfew at 9 p.m. They returned to the dorms. If they are late for training, they will be punished. Those who miss training or ignore the rules will be locked up for a week. However, if they set an example for the others, they will be rewarded. They go to the classroom once a week. The rest is based on endurance exercises. Their mission was to rehabilitate them thoroughly. Orders had to be strictly followed. They were society's rejects, and they had to leave the academy as new people. The students begin the training, doing more than 10 exercises that were extremely exhausting. If they made a mistake or didn't follow the instructions correctly, they had to do them for a longer time. The protagonist brothers hadn't eaten anything, and they were exhausted. Their bodies reached their limits. Chief Instructor Shin hits them. He hadn't given them permission to rest. Seeing what was happening, Hibiki tries to protect them and informs the instructor that they hadn't eaten. Shin punches him in the face, not caring that he was Shin's dog. Shiori sees what's happening and tries to interfere, but another instructor stops her. The protagonist defends himself and accidentally breaks Shin's nose. He rebels against him, as it wasn't the right way to teach the students. He threatens to report him to the police, but Shin is the police in that place. He tries to incite a kind of revolt, but all the students are terrified. No one is on his side, and the boss treats him like trash in front of everyone. Shiori intervenes and beats up the protagonist in front of Shin, apologizing for what happened. As the student council president, it was her duty to take care of the newcomers, and something like this wouldn't happen again. While they were bent over, begging for forgiveness, Shiori whispered to the protagonist that most of the instructors were retired military or police officers. He needed to stop acting like a hero. If he didn't want to die, he had to apologize. Hibiki lost control. He wasn't willing to submit. He preferred to die rather than be treated like scum. Someone could die if they continued to teach that way. Shiori tried to control him, but he pushed her, and her cell phone fell in front of the instructors. 2 students quickly subdued Shiori. Hibiki was subdued by one of the instructors because he was causing a lot of commotion. The other students were punished because of him. Shin was disappointed in Shiori and ordered the girls in his class to slap her for not following the rules. The protagonist had no choice but to apologize. The other guys were angry with him. If he wanted to commit suicide, he should do it without involving others. Jun delivered the final blow to Shiori, and the overweight student took the opportunity to taunt her. The students had to return to their dormitories. Hibiki apologized to Shiori, feeling like he had ruined everything. She didn't want to talk to him again. Shin took the opportunity to approach the protagonist and let him know that things were not as he believed. Being a hero had caused problems for everyone. The protagonist begged to become his subordinate. He wanted to stop being a loser. But Shin refused. He offered him a chance and rejected it. He would lose his reputation if he accepted too easily. If he really wanted to, he had to fulfill 3 tasks first. The first was to become the leader of his class, then take the position of discipline officer away from the overweight student. The last condition was a mystery, as it couldn't be heard due to the rain. If he managed to fulfill them, Shin would accept him as his disciple. Hibiki wanted to know Shin's true identity and his intentions. If he completed the tasks, Shin would reveal them. In a change of scene, the director asked Shin what had happened in the courtyard. Shin assured her that everything was under control. Jin reminded him of his duty, and he had to attend the workshop. Ryo was waiting for him. While the students were in their dormitories, Jun could be seen secretly talking to one of the instructors. On the other hand, the protagonist suddenly returned to his dormitory, where all his classmates were waiting to beat him up for what had happened. Hibiki told them without hesitation that from now on, he would be the class leader, and in exchange, they could enjoy the feast he had obtained from the dining hall. The protagonist began to understand how things worked in the school. His classmates were hungry, they recognized him as their leader, and he ordered them to gather all the students from class 4. He had a plan. He went to the overweight student's dormitory, broke down the door, punched him in the face, and fled. He had to defeat him to earn respect, following Shin's instructions. His subordinates chased him all over the academy, but the protagonist was faster. He managed to separate them, knowing he had no chance against all of them at once. He had to use his strengths and be smarter. Hibiki put stones in his jacket and attacked them, leaving several unconscious. He taunted the overweight student from a distance and couldn't stop, or it would be his end. He set a trap for his subordinates and arrived at the building just in time. The boss closed the doors, leaving his colleagues outside. The overweight student was finally alone, or so he thought. He called his friends, and they beat him up. In a scene change, Shin could be seen smiling as his plan continued to unfold, coughing loudly. Apparently, he was sick. On the other hand, the leader Shin concluded a meeting. The instructor who had secretly talked to Jun found out that a cell phone had been confiscated and tried to recover it. The next morning, the protagonist handed several cell phones to the head instructor, implicating the overweight student. He made Shin believe that he was on his side and that his teachings had changed his mind, inventing a lie about what had happened. Shin kicked the overweight student in the face, and he would be locked in the dungeon for a week. Then he thanked the protagonist for doing the right thing. Later, the director welcomed a new student who would be at the academy for a year, promising his parents that he would leave there with a radical change. They would be satisfied with the result. Jin knew that Shin had slipped away previously, causing problems, and after some time, he needed correction. The director ruthlessly punished him, and he had to pay for his sins. Ryo saw what happened. Later, he went to the dungeon to visit the overweight student. He needed information about Jun's cell phone and beat up Wudo, who told him everything that had happened. The boss had confiscated the cell phone. Ryo ordered him to be beaten in his cell, and then Shin would interrogate him. Shin was the cause of everything, and Ryo already knew it. When he asked the boss for Jun's cell phone, he deceived him, giving him another one. She wanted hers back. Shin pretended to be tough, but in reality, the director controlled him. Ryo would make him pay for everything. The protagonist tells Shin what happened with the cell phones, and he accepts him as his disciple. He had fulfilled the conditions, and they celebrate in their luxurious room, which was located on the top floor of the building, isolated from everyone else. Hibiki wanted to know his true identity, but Shin evades the question. When he defeated the overweight student, he learned exactly what he wanted. He knew that Bin had been bribed since he didn't intervene in the fight. The next phase of the plan was about to begin, and the new target was Class 6. In a scene change, Yo, who apparently was the leader of that class, was involved in smuggling. Shin informs Hibiki that many students in the school were involved, including the overweight student. He needed to find all the students with cell phones and report them to Shin. This way, he would gain Shin's trust and earn respect from the other students. Hibiki confesses to Shin that he took advantage of the chaos to keep one of the cell phones and give it to Shiori. Shin mocks him, saying he was too soft. He advises him to follow his guidance to earn the girl's respect and offers to help in any way he can, but the rest is up to Hibiki's decision. On the other hand, Shiori has some sad memories. It seems she had a sick family member in the hospital. However, at that moment, a young girl approaches her from behind, performs a judo move, and subdues her. Her sister comes to Shiori's defense, and a fight ensues. Hibiki must use lunchtime to go to Yo's base with his classmates, which would be more challenging than dealing with the overweight student. He needs to gather information, and his main goal is to gain Shiori's trust. However, his classmates refuse to accompany him as they have already gotten into trouble because of him. Kyo advises him not to get into trouble, so he can leave peacefully after a year. Hibiki gets angry, considering them all cowards. He decides not to try to help them anymore. Meanwhile, instructor Ryo is seen visiting Shin. Shiori continues to fight against Hoku and gets beaten up. She expected nothing less from the former student council president. They introduce themselves, with the smaller one, Akane, being the eldest. They already knew Hoku and belonged to class 18. They wanted to unite the 3 girls' classes and eventually the entire school. Hibiki should consider it as he could receive a reward. On the other hand, Ryo is choking Shin. His days are numbered due to his illness. But if he doesn't reveal the whereabouts of Jun's cell phone, his death will be hastened. Shin's bodyguard arrives just in time to save him. He was assigned by the director and knew when and how to die. He just wanted to leave that place. He doesn't have the cell phone. Hibiki arrives at the location Shin assigned him, where he encounters Khan's gang, who were up to something. He starts buying time. Akane shows Shiori the benefits of joining them, including unlimited internet access and cell phones. This way, Shiori could contact her younger brother. Shiori agrees under the condition of getting a cell phone with internet access. Akane only has her own, so she can't give it to her. However, she's a hacker and can track all the cell phones in the school and help her get one. Hibiki hits himself and pretends to be loyal to instructor Shin. Later, he arrives at the location and observes what's happening. He beats up Khan and sends him to the dungeon for 3 days, and the rest of the gang will go without dinner. Hibiki achieves his goal. Not everyone is bad. He offers them food in exchange for their cooperation, and Khan's friends accept. Shin watches everything from above and tells his bodyguard, Ban, that it's time to act. Hibiki finds out the location of Class 6A businesses, but his friends advise him not to mess with them as they are very strong, especially their leader and the instructor in charge, who is tougher than Shin. He also needs to be careful since they were informed that he would be in that location at noon. Hibiki wonders who had betrayed him. Shiori arrives with her companions, and Akane falls in love with him. Hoku knew that he had the overweight students' cell phones, and she wanted them. The guys with Hibiki mock them, but Hoku easily defeats them all. If he didn't want to end up like them, he had to obey. The protagonist apologizes to Shiori for everything that happened, but she was with Hoku and her sister. He had to give Shiori the cell phone he had willingly. At that moment, Shin arrives to protect his subordinates. Shiori is upset, but Shin gives her a cell phone with no signal. He explains that the school blocks the signal, and the Wi-Fi has a password. They need to be careful with accusations. As for the other 2 girls, he invites them to join. Otherwise, it's best not to interfere, or they'll end up like the overweight student. Hibiki tries to clear up the misunderstanding, but the girls start chasing them. They enter a building, head to the men's restroom, and set a trap. They meet up with Yo and Ban. Shin wanted to talk, but Hoku attacks without thinking. Yo wasn't as kind. He ruthlessly beats the girls. The protagonist defends Shiori. Shin didn't want it to come to this. He didn't like hitting women. He introduces his new companions, and Yo knew that he had been sent to investigate with Hibiki. So, he decided to go directly to him and join forces. He thought Hibiki had betrayed him but decided to give him another chance. Ban restrains the girls, and they need to undress and take photos. If they challenge him again, he would spread the pictures throughout the school. The protagonist reluctantly agrees. The new guy, Moku, had previously escaped from the school. The cook was happy to see him return because he had money, but there were rumors that he had been beaten by the instructors. Moku ate alone, and the other students bullied him. He asked for help from Shin, but he had betrayed his trust when he escaped. Shin hits him and slowly walks away. Moku confesses that he didn't want to escape, but they were going to kill him. Shin remembers fragments of his past as he listens to Moku's confession. The confrontation between Hibiki and Shin continues. Hibiki hoped that Shin wouldn't harm the girls if they stayed out of his way. He needed to act quickly and obey. He takes off his jacket and throws it in Ban's face, creating a distraction so the sisters can escape. They needed to find the instructors. However, Shiori wasn't as lucky. She would be under Shin's control. The girls look for Bin, who arrives at the scene to see what's happening. However, Shin is always one step ahead. Instructor Ryo is in charge of Class 6, and he sets a trap for Hibiki. He knows that Hibiki has a cell phone and takes it from him in front of Bin. Shin exposes the protagonist when Ryo confronts him in his room. Ryo will help him get Jun's cell phone in exchange for working with him. Hibiki is accused of various crimes and will be in the dungeon for 2 weeks. As for his accomplices, Akane, Hoku, and Shiori, they have to run 5 extra kilometers each day and clean the bathrooms for a month. Shiori thanks him for what he did but doesn't want to see him again. The protagonist used to play sports, but things got complicated, and he got into video games. He became obsessed and hated everyone around him. He wouldn't trust anyone again and would come out of the dungeon a changed person. In a scene change, Shin is seen giving instructions to Ban, and later, Instructor Ryo visits him somewhat annoyed. On the other hand, Shin continues to have memories of his past. It seems he was in a war, terrified at the time, not wanting to die. His leader tried to stop the enemies, and the success of the mission depended on Shin. But he couldn't do anything and hid in a cave until nightfall. His leader was killed, and he felt like a coward. He wakes up terrified from the nightmare. All his comrades died on that mission, and he was the only survivor. He went to give his condolences to Kai's wife, but she was furious and didn't want to be near a coward. Furthermore, the funeral had ended, and he looked for his son, Gon, who hated him for abandoning them. He didn't even know how many years he was or all the things they had been through. He couldn't be a hero. Being a police officer was useless. He becomes too agitated and starts convulsing, dying in Shin's arms. He's buried alongside his father, Kai. The chief officer tells Shin that Kai also had a daughter, but no one knew where she was. They were aware of everything Shin had done for Kai's family and collected some money to give to his mother and wife, but there were limits. Shin gets angry, saying that Kai was killed by a spy, and the reinforcements never arrived. The chief officer interrupts him, reminding him that he was the only survivor, and people were watching him. He shouldn't get involved in that path. Shin couldn't bear it anymore and leaves. Later, he finds the location of his daughter, Jean, who is now the school's director. She's whipping a man in a hotel, and Shin interrupts her, informing her that her father and brother have died. However, she doesn't care and already knows who he is thanks to her father. The man tied to the bed was her husband, and she let him die to inherit his wealth. Shin is angry about the things she's doing, disappointing her father. However, he starts whipping her. He was the only survivor of the mission and thought she was the spy. He didn't want to hear her sermons. It was the only way he had to pay his debts, and when his mother collapsed and was hospitalized, he wasn't there. He never cared. Someone like that couldn't be a hero. He was with that old pervert because he liked it. The inheritance would go to her son. The only thing her father left her was a rundown school. Shin wanted her to continue torturing him and cries on his knees in front of Jean. Everything was his fault, and he was scared. Remorse was consuming him from the inside. If he wanted to repay his debt, he had to go to the school with her and guide the students. His life now belonged to her. Returning to the present, Shin is seen supervising the other instructors with a shipment. Ryo approaches him and comments that he's too soft with the students. Shin and the protagonist have caused problems, and they were under his care. He needed to be more careful, or he would assume responsibility. Shin wondered if he was paying for his sins. On the other hand, Shiori and the girls were cleaning the bathrooms. Akane complained. She was exhausted, but this punishment was better than the perverse photos they were going to take of them. The best thing was not to cause more problems and finish the punishment. Hoku wanted to know how she ended up in that place. She should be with her brother in the hospital. Akane could steal a cell phone so she could talk to him, but they needed the device she lost when Shin kidnapped them in the bathroom. Otherwise, they could only access the local network. Time passes, and the protagonist gets out of the dungeon. His personality had changed completely. On the other hand, the girls tell Shiori that there were 2 networks. Akane decides to investigate, but in reality, she was looking for an excuse to stop cleaning the bathrooms with them. However, things don't go well for her, as a group of students chases her around the school. Moku was alone in an alley, while Akane was fleeing from the students. She stumbles upon him. They caught up with her, knowing that the boy was a deserter, and they wanted to take advantage of both of them at the same time. Moku was resigned, but at that moment, Hibiki arrives. Akane is surprised to see him. He was a completely different person now. He protects the boys from the bullies, hitting the joints and weak points of the human body, managing to defeat them all. They retreat for now, and Akane asks the protagonist to accompany her to tend to her wounds since he had saved her. Moku is impressed by Hibiki's bravery and strength. They head to the room where Shiori had healed him on the first day he arrived at the school. Akane is hopelessly in love with the protagonist and tries to kiss him forcefully. At that moment, her sister and Shiori arrive, wanting to know what they are doing together. Hibiki changes his demeanor when he sees Shiori, but he is still determined to follow the path he has chosen. On the other hand, Ryo visits the president, or rather, he makes perverted advances towards her. At the same time, the students are doing exercises, and during a short break, the protagonist takes the opportunity to publicly apologize. With Shin's permission, after a moving speech, the students don't believe a word he says, except for Shin, who was moved and trusted him again. He allowed himself to be easily fooled by the protagonist. At that moment, the girls from class 18 arrive and propose to help the new students. Instructor Cho, who was in charge of that class, informs Shin of the situation. The girls had trained in self-defense, and since they didn't get results with the other girls, they decided to try with the boys. However, the veterans were stronger, and they could hurt them. It was better to train with the newcomers. Shin accepts and sends 4 of his students to fight, as well as the girls from class 18. They couldn't hit the fallen, and the battle begins. However, they didn't last even a minute. The girls quickly defeated them all, and Hoku humiliated the leader of the boys. Shin was ashamed of his students, and they would go to bed without dinner. However, the protagonist wanted to try. When they met in the room with Akane, the protagonist proposed to work together. He didn't expect them to trust him, so they had to fight in public. If he could beat Hoku, they would consider him. Before the battle began, the protagonist made Hoku angry and started attacking frantically. Cho suggested that the instructor send for a stretcher since Hoku was the strongest in the class, even better than many men. The girls wanted to beat him up for being a pervert. Hibiki took a defensive stance. He knew he didn't stand a chance against her, so he decided to wear her down first, waiting for the exact moment to counterattack. He managed to put her in a hold and strangled her. Hoku surrendered. He had fought dirty, but he had won. His class was saved from punishment thanks to him. Cho was angry, but Shin defended the protagonist. He was a rookie and didn't know anything about combat, but if Cho disagreed, they could fight each other. Cho refused, knowing he didn't stand a chance against him. The protagonist was an expert in combat. When he entered the academy, he defeated everyone. The class continued to celebrate Hibiki's victory, but not for long. Ryo arrives at that moment with his class and, seeing the interaction, he wants to participate. He didn't think it was appropriate to celebrate a victory against girls. He takes advantage of their motivation and proposes a competition against his class. Yo wanted to fight them, especially the protagonist. Ryo provokes instructor Shin by insulting his students. Hibiki wondered what was happening and why Ryo was acting that way. When Ryo talked to the director, he punched him between the legs for being a pervert. Chief Hyo was looking out for his interests, but Ryo didn't care about that. Shin's brother was his sponsor, and Ryo wanted Shin to leave the school. The protagonist realized that there was a problem between them, and things got complicated. He was about to earn Shin's trust again. He decides to accept the challenge. He had to try. However, Shin stops him. Fighting Yo wasn't like fighting Hoku. Yo entered the academy because of his fighting skills. He was the strongest student in the academy. But the protagonist was clever. He wasn't an experienced fighter, just a video game player. He challenges Yo to stand at attention, and the instructor accepts. Shin outlines the rules of the competition. Basically, they had to stand at attention without moving a single muscle for a long time, and the first one to give up would lose. An hour passes, and the boys are still standing. The other students are allowed to sit after 3 hours, but Hibiki and Yo continue to stand. They reach 3 hours, and the other students are allowed to sit down. Hibiki is determined to win to gain Shin's trust, while Ryo is scared. If Yo loses, he will be publicly humiliated. Instructor Shin suggests stopping them, as they could collapse if they continued. Ryo agrees, knowing that he no longer had the fat guy. Yo was the only one left. The competition ends in a tie. Yo is not happy with the result. Shin allows the protagonist to rest, and Moku is in the same room. He offers to accompany him and is impressed by the protagonist's competition. Hibiki confesses to him that he used to run marathons, which gave him endurance. However, Yo not only had strength but also endurance. Hibiki knew that Yo wouldn't let what had happened slide. He orders Moku to fetch cold and hot water. Yo arrives in the room where the protagonist was and throws the water all over his body. After standing for so long, combined with the sweat, it triggered a reaction. His muscles could suffer from cramps, spasms were also possible, and it could even affect his heart. Yo kneels down and starts vomiting, and the protagonist takes advantage of the moment to give him what he deserved. The other students were wandering around the building, talking about what had happened. They could get into trouble with Yo if they supported the protagonist. At that moment, the protagonist pushes him, and he falls right in front of the other students. They couldn't believe that Hibiki was defeating him. Yo's fellow students held him back, and the protagonist couldn't hit him. He asks the others to help him. If they managed to get rid of Yo, Class 6 would be lost. However, they were all cowards, and they decide to support Yo. But at that moment, Moku hits his fellow student in the back with a chair, helping the protagonist. The leader of the newcomers, Mei, upon seeing Moku, says that he was the dog who had escaped through the tunnel. Moku was angry. He hadn't escaped, he had grown tired of being mistreated. He hits Yo while he is on the ground. The protagonist decides to give them one last chance to join him. When the other boys see the protagonist challenging a veteran like Yo, they decide to follow him. They push aside their leader, Mei. He was a coward, after all. The others wondered how they could stand up to Yo. They were just newcomers. The protagonist gives them a demonstration. Anyone who challenges or mocks him will regret it. He mercilessly beats Yo. In a scene change, Shin is seen at a funeral. The person who had died was Yui's lover, apparently due to drugs. Shin's brother reminds him that standing at his mother's grave wouldn't bring her back and that the man's blood ran through their veins. They weren't sentimental. Shin smiles. The real culprit behind his mother's death was right there. His brother wonders if he had lost his mind, and maybe it was best to have him hospitalized for a while. The protagonist has a strange dream, remembering the marathons he used to run with Shiori and the beating he had given Yo. He had become a different person. When he wakes up, he realizes that his whole class was waiting for him. Kyo apologizes on behalf of everyone, and they would be with him from now on. Hibiki decides to adopt the same attitude as Shin and acts conceited. He didn't have to accept them, they had never trusted him. At that moment, he wonders where he was. Instead of taking advantage while he was sleeping, they decided to ask him for help. He wondered if they had stopped fearing Shin, as no one mentioned him. On the contrary, all the attention was on Yo. He could be manipulating things from the shadows. He should have already found out about Yo's defeat, but the whole school was calm, and even Ryo hadn't done anything. The protagonist wants to know what Shin is up to, so he asks his classmates. But they hadn't heard anything about him. No one had seen him. If they knew something, they should report it immediately. He accepts them as his brothers, and if anyone messes with Moku, they will pay for it. In a scene change, Shin's brother talks to Hyo. He informs him that the shipment would arrive in 2 days and hands over the school accounts. The students were rebelling, and he would personally take care of that. He orders Hyo to keep an eye on Shin, as it was very strange. He entered that school of his own free will, and he didn't have much time left. He wanted to see him. It was the least he could do in memory of their father. Hyo accepts the orders. He would contact him later, but he was arriving at the school, and he would lose the signal. On the other hand, Shiori and her friends steal Yo's classmate's cell phone. He tries to scare them by mentioning instructor Ryo, but they would only borrow it. If he didn't want to receive a beating from Hoku and accompany Yo in the hospital, he should keep quiet. Hyo hits Shin in the director's office in front of the other instructors. The school was in chaos because of him. He had warned him about Shin, but he had chosen to ignore it. The director defends him, saying that they accepted Shin because they asked for it and took care of him as they wanted. They couldn't blame them for what had happened. She reminds him that she was the director, and he should respect her. Hyo assigns him the task of supervising the boys, and Chief Shin should take a break and tend to his injuries. In the meantime, he would be in charge. Hyo leaves the room with Ryo. He was pleased with the way he humiliated Shin, but that wasn't the reason he had gone there. He asks Ryo where the cell phone is and excuses himself, saying it was out of battery. However, he knew that Ryo had beaten up the fat guy almost to death. He also wanted to know what had happened to Shin. Ryo tells him that Shin had disappeared, but he was hiding something. On the other hand, they encountered a problem. Shiori couldn't contact her brother with the stolen cell phone. They needed Akane's device to contact any cell phone outside the facility. Shiori realizes that no one had seen Shin, and something was going on. She also remembers that Jun had told her she could call her boyfriend, and they needed to investigate her. The sisters were curious. They wanted to know why she was at the school. She didn't seem like an internet addict. She doesn't say anything. She just remembers the dark things she experienced after her parents' death. It appears that some guy had tried to abuse her. At that moment, the protagonist arrives. Shiori leaves, leaving them alone with Hibiki. As she does so, she thinks that her friends couldn't find out what she had done. Otherwise, they would hate her. She had to fix things on her own. In a scene change, Hyo is seen alone with Jun. It appears they have a relationship. He would take care of her while also checking the cell phone and investigating Shiori. Hibiki goes with the girls to Shin's room. They enter and are surprised by the mess. It's in shambles. Akane takes the opportunity to look for her device, and the protagonist checks Shin's desk, finding chocolate and many medicines. He was beginning to understand the situation. At night, Shiori talks to Jun. She knows about her brother. She saw his history. He was undergoing treatment for addiction and couldn't leave the place without his guardian's permission. If she did what Jun asked, she could get her out of school in 2 days, and she would be reunited with her brother. Later, Hibiki checks the sewers and finds a cell phone with Akane's device. He wonders what Shin is up to. Shiori's father had died from an illness, her mother had committed suicide with pills, and her younger brother only had her. Her father's cousin became their guardian and was supposed to take care of them. Her father's illness was hereditary, and her brother, Shu, started showing symptoms. He was hospitalized, and her uncle decided to take care of the expenses, but he only wanted to take advantage of her. Before her family died, they left her some money, but her uncle stole it to pay for her brother's treatments and other things. One day, he tried to abuse her, but Shiori killed him. This might be the reason she ended up at the school. On the other hand, the protagonist couldn't sleep. He was thinking about the last condition that Shin had told him. Only he knew what it was. Moku wakes up and talks to him about the time they escaped. He met someone with purple hair who gave him a map of the drainage system and told him that if he left, he could post on the internet about what was happening there. Moku's description matched Shin, but he didn't go by that name. When he left, he made the post, but it was deleted immediately, and his parents thought he wasn't cured and brought him back. The next day, the protagonist gives instructions to all his brothers in the training field. They had to work hard for Shin to recognize them and gain the respect of the other classes. The other students had heard rumors about Yo's defeat, so it was best to stay away from them. Later, the instructors arrive, and Hyo introduces himself. He tells the newcomers that he suspended Shin for not doing his job well and would be in charge of them for now. Hibiki wonders what's happening. First Shin's disappearance and now the boss. Hyo orders them to stand at attention for 2 hours, and if one of them fails, they all start over. In the middle of the exercise, Moku collapses, and Hyo picks him up effortlessly. He orders the others to start again. The protagonist apologizes to Hyo for what happened with the girls and with Class 6. He takes responsibility and asks to be punished in exchange for leaving his classmates alone. Hyo orders them to rest for a few minutes, and then they must go to Class 6, with Hibiki accompanying him. He takes him to an office, offers him tea, and wants to talk. Later, the punishment will come. He lets Hibiki know that he is the most important student in the school. When he arrived at school, he heard all the rumors about him. Students respected him, and the instructors said he had guts. He was the new leader of the school. Hyo suggests helping him with the cell phone business in exchange for his help. Hibiki remembers Shin's third condition, which was reach the top of the school. Hyo pressures him, takes Shiori to the dungeon, shows him her condition, and he is devastated. But he decides to act for Hyo. He laughs like a maniac and accepts to help. Hyo orders him to find a lost cell phone, and he will take care of the rest. Hibiki was plotting something. He had already found the cell phone and a map on Shin's desk. He showed them to the sisters and Moku. He handed the cell phone to Hyo and asked him to let him take care of Shiori. They took her out of the dungeon and brought her to the field. She was unconscious, and the protagonist cried, apologizing to her. They would soon escape from that horrible place. In a scene change, Hyo can be seen killing Shin's mother by injecting drugs into her. It seems he received orders from his brother. The other children made fun of his mother, but she told him not to blame his father. He was trying hard for them. Later, Shin was in the pipes. He had spent a year in that hell, and he had a surprise for his wonderful brother. The girls from Class 18 informed their instructor that Hoku and her sister were sick, which is why they couldn't attend training. On the other hand, Hibiki told instructor Ryo that Moku stayed in bed with a fever and hoped he would forgive his absence. Ryo made a public announcement that Hibiki would be the new president of the council and the disciplinary officer. They should follow his example and work hard. Meanwhile, Hibiki remembered a conversation he had with Hyo, in which Hyo ordered him to find Shin, who was the brother of a good friend of his but was lost. Ryo informed him that they had fought the last time he saw him, and if he found him, he could do whatever he wanted with him. Ryo warned Hyo that the protagonist was cunning, so he shouldn't trust him too much. But Hyo believed that because everyone had betrayed him, he would do whatever it took to reach the top. If he didn't follow orders, they could easily get rid of him, just as they had done with Jun, who caused a lot of trouble and lost an important cell phone. Hyo had enrolled her in the school to hide from the police. She was a scammer. The instructors were searching for Shin, and it was almost impossible for Hibiki to find him. But that didn't matter. He didn't have much time left. The merchandise was about to arrive, and they needed to get moving. In a scene change, the protagonist draws the attention of the other students. They were in a school alley, beating up a defenseless person, adopting the same attitude as Wudo. It wasn't right. He helps the young man and takes the opportunity to apologize to everyone. He had caused them a lot of trouble, but at the same time, he needed their help. He informs them that that day would be their last training together. The rumors about the academy reached the ears of NEPA News, the editorial office, and not only there. Information about the school quickly went viral, with many websites posting about it. People had no idea that such a horrible place existed. The merchandise arrives, and Hyo inspects it personally. At the same time, a reporter arrives at the facility, wanting to ask some questions. Hyo receives an alert message and realizes that there was a spy among them. He orders the electricity to be cut quickly, seals off the area, and sends all the students to the courtyard to start training. The disaster on the internet was already done, and he needed Jun's help, but it was too late. He would have to find a way to fix things on his own. On the other hand, the school quickly filled up with reporters who had solid information about the abuse, videos, not to mention that they had the students cut off from communication. Director Jean comes out to answer their questions. Akane was in charge of uploading all the information to the internet. The next step was for Hibiki to do his part. He talks to Hyo and hears rumors about the reporters at the entrance, and this information could have been leaked from Jun's cell phone. Hyo would take care of resolving things, but before leaving, the protagonist tells him that he had found Shin, and Ryo was protecting him, along with Ban. He needed to confirm the information personally. Hyo explodes in anger, punches the protagonist, wanting to know what he had done, but he doesn't give up so easily. He headbutts Hyo and breaks his nose, telling him that he wouldn't let him escape from that place. At that moment, Shin arrives. Shin suggests that Hyo surrender. The school was full of reporters, and the police would arrive soon. It was best to surrender peacefully. Hyo laughs maniacally, saying that the reporters and the police wouldn't find anything. When they entered the school, they would see the instructors training the kids. They wouldn't lack food or medicine. The electricity had been cut off to isolate them from the internet because they were addicted. Everyone would believe him. But at that moment, he realizes that his orders were not followed, and there was no one in the field. Shin tells him that he couldn't control them forever. Hyo still had plans to deal with the police. Shin appears at the last moment to deliver the final blow. He had been waiting a long time to enjoy that moment. He slowly tosses a match to the ground, setting his room on fire. Everyone can see the fire, and the reporters call the fire department. Shin orders the protagonist to leave. He would take care of Hyo. He thanks the instructor for his teachings and leaves. Shin smiles satisfactorily. It was time to pay for his sins. He punches Hyo in the face. Chaos takes over the academy, and the students beat up the instructors. The classrooms are empty. Akane, Hoku, Moku, and Shiori escape through the pipes. The protagonist had previously met with Ban and instructor Shin. It seems everything was part of a common plan. Hibiki runs to Shin's room amidst the flames, manages to reach the top, and looks his friend in the eyes, awaiting his death. Shin cries with joy. Together, they exposed the dark secrets of the academy and freed all the students. And that's how the first season of this anime ends. If you've reached this part of the video, let me tell you that you've been one of the few people to make it this far. So comment the word addiction in the comments. Remember to subscribe to not miss any videos. With that said, see you in the next video.